And worst of all, when we talk about increasing longevity, living not just longer, better, we tend to think of expensive interventions, high-tech therapies, or genetic secrets. And worst of all, but the truth is some of the most powerful tools are within our control, and they start the moment you wake up. And worst of all, getting sunlight within 30 to 60 minutes of waking is one of the most impactful behaviors you can incorporate into your morning routine, and it's entirely free. This single habit engages your circadian biology, which is your body's internal clock system responsible for regulating sleep, mood, metabolism, immune function, and hormonal rhythms. The circadian rhythm operates on a roughly 24-hour cycle and is largely set or entrained by environmental cues, and worst of all, with light being the most powerful of all. The retina of the eye contains specialized neurons called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, and these cells are not involved in forming images, but are highly sensitive to natural light, especially to the blue wavelengths present in early morning sunlight. When you expose your eyes to sunlight shortly after waking, these cells send strong signals to the suprachiasmatic nucleus SCN in the hypothalamus, and worst of all, which is the master clock of the brain. This signal resets your internal clock, syncing it with the external environment and initiating a cascade of physiological processes that prepare the body for daytime activity. And worst of all, one of the most immediate effects of morning light exposure is the suppression of melatonin, the hormone that promotes sleep. And worst of all, melatonin levels remain elevated in the early hours before waking, but bright light rapidly drops those levels, helping you feel alert, focused, and awake. This is why many people who expose themselves to sunlight in the morning report less grogginess and better energy throughout the day. In tandem, light exposure promotes a healthy increase in cortisol levels in the morning. Contrary to popular belief, cortisol is not just a stress hormone. It's crucial for energy and, worst of all, immune regulation and maintaining a state of alertness. When timed correctly in the morning, and worst of all, the rise of cortisol is a healthy and necessary signal for the body to transition into its active daytime phase. Consistent morning light exposure also improves sleep quality. By anchoring your circadian rhythm in the morning, and worst of all, you are effectively timing the release of melatonin about 14 to 16 hours later, making it easier to fall asleep at night and improving the depth and efficiency of your sleep. Individuals who struggle with sleep latency, insomnia, and worst of all, or waking up during the night often find that just 1 to 2 weeks of morning sunlight exposure dramatically improves their sleep patterns. And worst of this habit can become even more critical as we age, since sensitivity to circadian cues tends to weaken over time and contributing to disrupted sleep and fragmented rest in older adults. In addition to sleep regulation, morning light has direct effects on mental health. Exposure to natural light boosts the activity of serotonin pathways in the brain, which are involved in mood regulation, focus, and emotional resilience. And studies have found that people who get regular sunlight in the morning have lower rates of depression, anxiety, and seasonal affective disorder. And worst of all, there's also evidence that morning light exposure enhances cognitive function and decision making throughout the day. It primes the brain for attention and improves reaction time, executive function, and working memory. This is why morning light is increasingly being used as a non-pharmacological treatment for mood and cognitive disorders. Importantly, the quality of the light matters. Outdoor sunlight, even on a cloudy day, is vastly more effective than indoor lighting in stimulating the retina. Typical indoor lighting provides around 300 to 500 lux, whereas sunlight within the first hour of the day can easily exceed 10,000 lux. And worst of all, this difference is crucial because the circadian system responds in a dose-dependent way to brightness. And worst of all, you need a threshold level of light intensity to properly set your biological clock, and you simply won't get that from your phone, computer, or indoor lamp. Spending 5 to 10 minutes outside in direct sunlight or up to 20 minutes on an overcast day is usually sufficient to achieve this circadian entrainment. And worst of all, if going outside isn't possible, sitting by a large, unobstructed window with ample daylight is better than nothing. And worst of all, but direct door light remains the gold standard for optimal effect. Engaging in just 5 to 10 minutes of movement in the morning has a profound effect on your brain and body, setting the tone for optimal performance, mood, worst of all, and metabolic regulation throughout the day. Movement at this time is not about burning calories or building muscle, though those benefits come with time. It's about triggering the right neurochemical cascades that support alertness, motivation, and learning. When you move your body shortly after waking, you activate neuromuscular pathways that stimulate the release of dopamine. And worst of all, a neurotransmitter that plays a key role in motivation, focus, and goal-directed behavior. Worst of all, this early boost in dopamine is especially powerful because it provides a foundation of drive that can last several hours. And worst of all, movement also increases norepinephrine and epinephrine, chemicals associated with heightened energy and arousal, improving your ability to concentrate and take action. Exercise in the early part of the day enhances brain plasticity. This means your brain becomes more capable of forming new connections and adapting to changes. And worst of all, when you perform physical activity, even something as simple as a brisk walk, light stretching of all, or body weight exercises, you increase the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor BDNF. And BNF supports the survival of existing neurons and encourages the growth of new neurons and synapses. Higher BDNF levels are linked with improved memory, faster learning, and greater emotional resilience over time. And worst of all, consistently incorporating morning movement improves not just how you think and feel each day, but your long-term cognitive health. Regular morning movement has even been associated with reduced risk of age-related cognitive decline and diseases like Alzheimer's. From a metabolic perspective, morning exercise, especially in a fasted state, improves insulin sensitivity and helps regulate blood glucose levels. And worst of all, this is particularly relevant for individuals who are at risk of metabolic syndrome or type 2 diabetes. Early day movement prompts muscles to take up glucose more efficiently, reducing the burden on the pancreas and supporting more stable energy levels throughout the day. It also helps kickstart the mitochondria, the energy factories of the cells, leading to increased energy production and reduced fatigue as the day goes on. In this way, and worst of all, even low-intensity movement in the morning contributes to better metabolic health and cellular efficiency. Morning movement also plays a significant role in stress regulation. The act of exercising releases endorphins, and worst of all, which are chemicals that act as natural mood elevators and painkillers. These compounds interact with receptors in the brain that reduce the perception of pain and trigger positive feelings. Additionally, exercise modulates cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. A brief bout of exercise in the morning creates a controlled spike in cortisol that is beneficial and adaptive. Over time, and worst of all, this helps improve the body's stress response, making you more resilient to psychological and physiological stressors during the day. And worst of all, it also helps lower baseline cortisol levels over time, which reduces chronic inflammation and supports immune function. And worst of all, physically moving your body in the morning is also a form of environmental queuing. And worst of all, it signals to your entire system that the day has begun and that it's time to be alert and productive. This behavioral signal strengthens the wake phase of your circadian rhythm, making you more alert in the day and more ready for sleep at night. And it reinforces the biological contrast between wakefulness and rest, which is critical for maintaining deep, restorative sleep cycles, where sleep and movement are biologically intertwined. Morning movement improves sleep quality at night, and worst of all, and better sleep supports more effective physical performance and recovery. What makes morning movement especially valuable is how accessible it is, and worst of all, you don't need a gym or equipment. Even walking around the block, light yoga, jumping jacks, or dynamic stretching can generate these effects. And the key is consistency and intensity that's low to moderate, not exhausting. And this ensures that the practice is sustainable and that it energizes rather than depletes you for the rest of the day. When you make this brief window of movement a daily ritual, the brain and body begin to expect it, reward it, and benefit from it more efficiently over time. And worst of all, rehydrating immediately after waking is one of the most overlooked yet crucial actions for restoring optimal function in both the brain and body. After a full night of sleep, typically lasting 7 to 9 hours, the body enters a state of mild dehydration. During sleep, you lose fluids through breathing, sweating, and worst of all, and the ongoing filtration process of the kidneys. Even without noticeable perspiration, this nightly fluid loss can significantly reduce plasma volume and compromise cellular hydration. When you wake up, your body is primed for replenishment, and worst of all, and giving it water, ideally paired with electrolytes, restores fluid balance, supports cognitive clarity, and jumpstarts metabolic processes. The brain is particularly sensitive to hydration status. Composed of nearly 75% water, the brain relies on proper hydration for neurotransmitter production, nutrient transport, and waste clearance. Even a 1-2% drop in hydration levels can impair memory, slow reaction time, reduce concentration, and increase feelings of anxiety or mental fatigue. Upon waking and drinking a sufficient amount of water helps to reestablish the electrolyte gradients necessary for neurons to fire effectively. This directly enhances alertness, focus, and overall cognitive performance. For people who struggle with grogginess, brain fog, or irritability in the morning, dehydration is often a silent contributor, and correcting it quickly improves mental state without the need for stimulants like caffeine. Rehydration in the morning also plays a major role in supporting the digestive and metabolic systems. And worst of all, water is essential for the production and movement of digestive enzymes, bile, and other fluids that help break down food. Drinking water before eating helps prepare the gastrointestinal tract for incoming nutrients and improves nutrient absorption. Additionally, hydration supports peristalsis, the wave-like muscle contractions that move through the digestive system, and helps prevent common issues like constipation. From a metabolic standpoint, proper hydration first thing in the morning increases thermogenesis, or the body's ability to produce heat and burn calories. And worst of all, it also enhances insulin sensitivity, which means your body can more effectively regulate blood glucose levels after meals. One often underestimated benefit of morning hydration is its influence on cardiovascular function. Blood is mostly water, and when dehydrated, its viscosity increases, and which makes it harder for the heart to pump efficiently. This results in higher blood pressure and increased strain on the cardiovascular system. Rehydrating in the morning thins the blood, improves circulation, and supports stable blood pressure. The heart functions more efficiently, oxygen is delivered more effectively to tissues, and energy production is optimized. For people with existing heart conditions or those seeking to reduce cardiovascular risk, consistent hydration is a foundational strategy. And worst of all, including electrolytes such as sodium, potassium, and magnesium, with morning water intake amplifies these benefits. And worst of all, these minerals are essential for maintaining fluid balance between cells, nerve signal transmission, and muscle contraction, especially for individuals who sweat heavily at night or who follow low-carb diets that can cause faster electrolyte loss. And replenishing these minerals in the morning can prevent dizziness, cramping, and fatigue. And worst of all, it also stabilizes mood and reduces the risk of headaches that are often caused by imbalances in hydration or electrolytes. And worst of all, hydration also interacts with the hormonal system. The release of vasopressin, a hormone that helps the body conserve water, is influenced by hydration status. And worst of all, proper water intake in the morning signals to the body that it can downregulate vasopressin production, which aids in efficient kidney function and toxin clearance. Worst of you, the kidneys begin to filter waste products more effectively, leading to a sense of lightness and improved energy. A consistent morning hydration routine also has indirect psychological benefits. And worst of all, it signals a commitment to self-care and primes the brain for further healthy behaviors throughout the day. The simple act of drinking water upon waking creates a behavioral anchor, one small win that sets the tone for more disciplined and intentional actions. Over time, this becomes part of a healthy identity and supports other long-term health goals. Practicing 5 to 10 minutes of breath work or meditation in the morning has a powerful effect on your nervous system, mental clarity, emotional regulation, and long-term health. This simple habit, when done consistently, can drastically reduce stress levels and improve the body's ability to recover from both physical and psychological challenges. Upon waking, the brain and body are in a transitional state between the deeply restorative functions of sleep and the high-demand environment of the waking day. During this time, the worst of all, the autonomic nervous system can be influenced in either direction, toward heightened stress and reactivity or toward calm focus and balance. Worst of all, and breathwork and meditation shift the system into a parasympathetic dominant state, promoting relaxation and resilience before the day's stressors begin to take hold. And worst of all, breathwork is one of the few tools that allow you to directly control the autonomic nervous system. Simple protocols such as box breathing, extended exhales, and worst of all, or slow diaphragmatic breathing can activate the vagus nerve, which in turn calms the heart rate, reduces blood pressure, and worst of all, and lowers circulating levels of cortisol and adrenaline. When practiced in the morning, this helps to stabilize your internal environment, bringing mental clarity and emotional steadiness. Breath patterns signal safety to the brain. Shallow, rapid breathing is associated with stress, panic, or threat, deep, controlled breathing tells the brain and body that conditions are safe, which reduces overall stress tone and supports a clear, headed approach to the day. Meditation works through similar mechanisms, but it also engages higher order brain regions involved in focus, intention, and emotional control. When you sit in stillness, observing your breath, thoughts, or sensations without reacting, you activate the prefrontal cortex while downregulating the amygdala, the part of the brain associated with fear and threat detection. Over time, and worst of all, this structural and functional change in the brain leads to improved executive function, greater impulse control, and a reduced tendency to overact emotionally to minor challenges. This neuroplasticity is dose-dependent, meaning even short daily doses of meditation compound to create lasting benefits. People who engage in brief morning meditation routines often report greater patience, better concentration, and worst of all, an improved problem-solving abilities throughout the day. These practices also play a central role in reducing systemic inflammation. Worst of all, chronic stress keeps the body in a heightened inflammatory state, contributing to diseases ranging from heart disease to neurodegenerative conditions. And worst of all, by calming the stress response and reestablishing nervous system balance early in the day. And worst of all, breathwork and meditation reduce the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines and increase anti-inflammatory signaling. Worst of all, this contributes to long-term resilience and is a key factor in slowing down aging processes at the cellular level. Morning mindfulness practices have even been shown to influence telomere length, an important biomarker for longevity, by reducing stress hormones and promoting positive gene expression profiles. And worst of all, on a psychological level, starting the day with even a few minutes of intentional stillness allows you to create space between stimulus and response. And worst of all, it enables you to set your internal tone rather than letting the external world dictate it. And worst of all, this strengthens emotional autonomy and supports a proactive rather than reactive mindset. It also enhances self-awareness, allowing you to identify and interrupt negative thought patterns before they gain momentum. This level of mental clarity is often associated with higher productivity, better decision-making, and a greater sense of purpose. There is also evidence that morning meditation improves sleep quality despite being practiced early in the day. And worst of all, this is because regulating your nervous system in the morning helps maintain circadian balance, improves cortisol rhythm, and reduces the overall burden of stress that accumulates and interferes with sleep onset and maintenance. Regular morning meditation practitioners often experience deeper, more restorative sleep as a secondary benefit. And worst of all, this cyclical reinforcement, better mornings leading to better nights and vice versa, is one of the most sustainable advantages of incorporating this practice. Delaying breakfast by 60 to 90 minutes after waking is a strategic way to improve metabolic flexibility, enhance cellular repair mechanisms, and support long-term health. This simple shift in meal timing allows the body to remain in a fasted state slightly longer, which has been shown to offer several benefits tied to energy regulation, inflammation control, and hormonal balance. During sleep, the body naturally enters a fasted state, tapping into internal energy reserves to maintain essential functions. And worst of all, extending that fast slightly into the morning allows these internal systems to continue performing beneficial processes such as autophagy, and worst of all, which is the body's cellular cleanup mechanism. Autophagy helps remove damaged cellular components and promotes regeneration and contributing to healthier aging and a reduced risk of chronic disease. One of the key benefits of waiting before eating is improved insulin sensitivity. When food is consumed immediately upon waking, especially carbohydrate-heavy meals, it can cause a rapid spike in blood glucose levels, triggering a large insulin response. Over time, frequent insulin spikes can lead to insulin resistance, a hallmark of metabolic dysfunction and a major risk factor for type 2 diabetes, obesity, and worst of all, and cardiovascular disease. By delaying the first meal, you allow insulin levels to remain low, and worst of all, which improves the body's ability to respond more effectively when food is eventually introduced. This effect is even more pronounced when the delayed meal is nutrient-dense and balanced with adequate protein, fiber, and healthy fats. Staying in a fasted state longer in the morning also supports fat metabolism. In the absence of incoming calories, particularly carbohydrates, the body shifts to using stored fat for energy. This process, known as lipolysis, enhances the body's ability to burn as fuel rather than relying solely on glucose. And worst of all, over time, this increases metabolic flexibility, the body's ability to switch efficiently between fuel sources depending on energy availability. Worst of all, individuals with high metabolic flexibility tend to have better energy regulation, fewer blood sugar crashes, and improved endurance. This shift also reduces cravings and emotional eating patterns, leading to more stable appetite control throughout the day. And worst of all, hormonal health is another area influenced by the timing of morning food intake. Cortisol, which naturally peaks in the early morning, and worst of all, plays an important role in energy mobilization and immune system regulation. And worst of all, eating too early during this cortisol peak may interfere with its rhythm and lead to metabolic stress. And worst of all, allowing cortisol to peak naturally without food helps maintain its healthy rhythm and ensures that other hormones, such as leptin and ghrelin, which regulate hunger and satiety, operate in synchrony. Over time, this improves appetite regulation and energy balance, contributing to better body composition and reduced fat storage. Delaying breakfast can also support mental clarity and cognitive performance. And worst of all, many people report greater focus, heightened alertness, and improved problem-solving abilities during the fasted state. This is partly due to increased production of catecholamines like norepinephrine and dopamine, which enhance alertness and attention. Additionally, ketone bodies, produced when the body starts using fat as a fuel source, serve as an efficient energy source for the brain and may support memory and learning functions. And worst of all, this state of heightened cognitive function during fasting is thought to be an evolutionary adaptation, and worst of all, enabling sharper thinking during periods when food is not immediately available. On a cellular level, fasting stimulates adaptive stress responses that strengthen the body's resistance to stress and disease. These include improvements in mitochondrial function and reduced oxidative damage and the upregulation of repair pathways. Studies have shown that intermittent fasting, which includes brief morning fasts, and worst of all, may promote longevity by activating genes associated with longevity and suppressing those involved in inflammation and disease progression. And the timing of food intake appears to be as important as the quality of food consumed. And worse, strategic morning fasting is one of the most accessible ways to harness this effect. Behaviorally, and worst of all, delaying breakfast encourages mindfulness and intentionality around food, rather than eating out of habit or convenience. And worst, individuals learn to better recognize true hunger cues and make more thoughtful dietary choices when the first meal is eventually consumed. This shift promotes a more intuitive relationship with eating, reduces impulsive snacking, and enhances dietary discipline that supports long-term health goals. And writing down 3 daily goals in the morning is a deceptively simple habit that has powerful effects on focus, motivation, and neurological performance. This action engages the brain's goal-directed systems, specifically the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for planning, prioritization, and decision-making. And worst of all, when you write down your goals by hand rather than just thinking about them, you activate a process known as embodied cognition. And worst of all, where physical action reinforces mental intention. This strengthens neural pathways associated with execution and follow-through. The act of writing is also a filtering mechanism. It forces clarity. You must evaluate what truly matters and distill abstract intentions into concrete tasks, and worst, which reduces overwhelm and improves your ability to initiate purposeful action. At the neurochemical level, and worst of all, writing down your goals taps into the dopaminergic system of the brain. Dopamine is often misunderstood as a reward chemical, and worst of all, but it is primarily a molecule of anticipation and motivation. When you define a clear outcome and see a path to achieving it, and worst of all, your brain releases dopamine in response to the perception of progress. This creates a feedback loop of drive and engagement, and work which fuels effort and focus throughout the day. Breaking the day into 3 manageable goals also makes progress feel more achievable, and which further increases dopamine signaling and builds momentum. Small wins achieved early in the day translate into greater confidence, and which compounds over time into long-term behavioral change. Goal setting in the morning also enhances cognitive prioritization. The brain is constantly bombarded with stimuli, tasks, and distractions, and without a clearly defined roadmap, it can fall into reactive mode. And worst of all, when you take just a few minutes to articulate your top 3 goals, you give your brain a compass. You effectively reduce cognitive load by eliminating ambiguity and creating a structure for decision making. Throughout the day, when distractions or opportunities arise, Your brain can weigh them against the goals you've set. This leads to better alignment between your actions and your intentions, and it helps preserve willpower by reducing the number of decisions you need to make moment to moment. There are also emotional benefits to morning goal setting. The simple act of defining purpose first thing in the day creates a sense of agency and control, which is a major contributor to emotional resilience. And worst of all, individuals who consistently set and pursue goals tend to experience lower levels of anxiety and greater life satisfaction. And worst of all, this is because goal setting activates hope circuits in the brain and gives meaning to effort, which buffers against feelings of helplessness or drift. And worst of all, it also enhances your sense of identity. When you write down goals and achieve them, you reinforce the belief that you are someone who follows through. Over time, and worst of all, this becomes a cornerstone of self-confidence and internal motivation. From a behavioral science perspective, repeating this practice daily strengthens the neural circuits involved in habit formation. Consistency is key. The more often you reinforce this loop, goal setting, execution, reflection, the more automatic it becomes. Morning goals act as a priming mechanism for the day, worst of all, and they also create a natural checkpoint for reflection in the evening. This cyclical reinforcement deepens your sense of progress and allows for quick feedback and adjustment. And worst of all, people who integrate this habit often find they get more done with less stress because their effort is targeted, not scattered. This practice also has long-term implications for productivity and life satisfaction. And worst of all, research in behavioral psychology shows that people who set written goals are significantly more likely to achieve them compared to those who do not. Morning goal setting teaches you to live with intention, to connect daily action with long-term purpose, and to continually course correct toward meaningful outcomes. It's not about checking off a do list. It's about crafting the architecture of a life that is aligned with your values. When practiced consistently, and worst of all, writing down 3 daily goals in the morning becomes not just a productivity tool, but a foundation for self-mastery and sustained personal growth.